Good evening, everyone. Let's get started. My name is Brett Nixke. I'm a facilitator with the Bross Improved Grazing Group, and welcome to BIG's webinar on the local climatic outlook for this season, which is being presented tonight by Darren Ray. So before we get just started, just for those of you who are not familiar with BIG, just a bit of background. BIG's a regional group, and we conduct and communicate the results of grazing and I guess livestock type projects for the benefit of local producers. Now, by our key projects at the moment, currently we've got a 3-year project on the management of ewes in containment areas funded by MLA, and also a project on soil moisture monitoring in dryland grazing systems, where we actually have several weather stations and soil moisture probes set up in representative soil types across the Barossa region. These weather stations were first installed back in 2013, and it's actually through this project that tonight's webinar is being presented. So onto the webinar. Firstly, big thanks to and acknowledgement to the Adelaide Mount Lofty Ranges NRM board for funding BIG's soil moisture monitoring project, and therefore this webinar. Before Darren gets started, if you do have any questions, please send them in. Simply click on the little Q&A icon that you'll be able to see on your screen and submit your questions, and we'll just endeavour to address them at the end of the webinar. But before Darren starts, I'll just go ahead and launch a short poll to give us an idea, who's online. It's just a short poll that should come up now, and I'll just launch that now. If everyone could go ahead and click on their preferred answer. Get everyone? Yep. Yep, few answers coming in. Yep, keep on coming in, please. Give you a little bit more time. Another 10 seconds. All righty, we'll end the poll there. As you can see, most of the people are locals from the Barossa and surrounding districts. Most people, the predominant production system is sheep, and also we've got a mix of annual and perennials as our predominant grazing system. So thanks for that. I'll now hand over to Darren to present the webinar. Darren, I've just gone ahead and stopped sharing my screen. Could you go ahead and put yours on, please?
Yeah, thanks, Brett. You hearing me okay there?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, thanks, Darren. If you could pop your screen up, and just while Darren's doing that, just by way of introduction, Darren is trained in oceanography and meteorology before joining the BOM in 2002 as a forecasting meteorologist. He then moved to the climate section in 2017, managing BOM's climate activities across SA, including seasonal forecasting, until finishing with the Bureau in late last year. He's now working privately as a seasonal forecaster and consulting climatologist. Thanks, Darren. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Yeah, so I actually joined the climate section in 2007, so I had about 12 years looking after climate in South Australia for the Bureau. So yeah, finished up late last year and out my own now. And so what I'm going to run through today is, so hopefully there'll be some tools available to help people look at the both the short-term and the seasonal scale side of things. So I'm going to start off just looking, and I'll make this will be available to Brett as a PDF. So if people want to get a copy and have a look afterwards, to have a look at the links in their own time, that'll be available afterwards for people. But a couple of links here which are useful in terms of looking at what's going on. So the top in the broad scale, so I've got a map here, for instance, of the latest last week's rainfall there, which you can get from that link. You can just see the rainfall that's been falling around the place. So some places had what felt like a bit of a break season, but actually a lot of places that really missed out on that recent rainfall event. If you want to look at, say, Nuriupa, for instance, in terms of recent conditions for things like evaporation and rainfall and temperature and that sort of stuff, you can go into that link there as well. So there's a bit of information there to help you keep up to date with what's been happening. In terms of weather forecast information, there's a couple of useful links that I look at quite regularly. So if you're looking at the broad scale, this link here to pivotal weather is quite good, and I might actually leap out of the presentation and just go and have a quick look at that. So if we go out to what that looks like, so it goes to this page here, where you can actually flick through the week ahead, about 10 days ahead. So for instance, this is showing a bit of a week change through Friday, Easter Friday, but not much in that in terms of rainfall. And then we go out through warming up through early next week ahead of another week change coming through with a little bit of rainfall late next week. So useful little tool there. The other link on that page for more localized stuff, so you start out with the broad scale, then you can go into the local scale, looking at the meteorologics page. So one of the tricks with weather models is there's a whole lot of different weather models out there, and they all have their strengths and weaknesses. But it is useful to compare what each of the different models is showing. So this is a nice little page where you can look at a whole range of different models. So we've got a whole bunch of different models along the bottom there. So these European models, US, which is GFS, and Canadian, the Bureau's Access model, and then a couple other ones, European ones. And so you see all the different models there for temperature. If we can go into rainfall, and you can see they've got not much showing up on Saturday, and then they've got a little bit more rainfall accumulation, but only less than a millimetre or so happening on that cold front on the Friday. So you can actually there's actually some quite useful information there. It's even got wind speed, and so we're looking at that's the 10 days, or you can zoom in on the next 2 or 3 days in terms of the forecast information. So yeah, neat little tool. So that's some tools for the short term. In terms of climate influences, I'll go back to the presentation. There's a lot of different things that influence the climate. So I'm just going to go through a few today that are the major ones, and in terms of what that means for what we've been seeing over the last year or two, and even through summer and start of autumn, what that means for the next few months, and then through the rest of the year ahead. So I'll start out with the major influences in terms of El Nino, La Nina from the Pacific Ocean. So this is a climate pattern which impacts winter, spring, and you can see variability from one year to the next from the neutral phase, or it can go into a La Nina year or an El Nino year. Now these La Nina and El Nino events kick off typically through about sort of June, July, August, and they go for about 9 to 12 months. So they go through till about April the following year. La Nina events, El Nino events, we see weaker trade winds along the equator, and the warm water warmed up by the sun stays more in the central and eastern Pacific. The atmosphere tends to sink down more than usual, so we tend to get hot and dry conditions in El Nino years. And so you can think back to, say, 2015 or 2006, 82, and 2002, typical El Nino years. La Nina years, you tend to see stronger trade winds, you tend to see cooler temperatures in the oceans in the central and eastern Pacific, and the warm water tends to stay more around northern Australia, so you get increased cloud and increased rainfall. Now, I guess I'll just cutting the chase a little bit. We're seeing some indications we might be steering a little bit towards La Nina this year. Okay, so we'll be talking about more about that as we go through. So what can we expect to happen in July, August, and what does that mean for spring and into even early summer this year? So for those who watch Landline and they talk about the Southern Oscillation Index, or SOI, what that's doing is picking up what's going on with this atmospheric circulation over the top of the Pacific Ocean. So in El Nino events, for instance, the SOI is a measure derived from the surface air pressure at Darwin and surface air pressure at Tahiti in the middle of the Pacific. So they look at the difference from average of those two surface pressures and take them away and get the Southern Oscillation Index value. Basically what it's doing, when it's going negative, that's indicating the atmosphere is sinking down more than usual, and that's inhibiting rainfall. So negative SOI, which you often see in El Nino events, we typically see in El Nino events, negative SOI is one indicator of El Nino and that the rainfall is being suppressed. And so yeah, negative SOI you don't want. In La Ninas, you tend to see increasing air rising away from the surface, and that results in positive SOI values. And so positive SOI is an indication that your rainfall is being enhanced. SOI is one indicator of what's going on in terms of influences on rainfall. Indian Ocean Dipole, this is really big one for last year and the year before. You can see variability from one year to the next from neutral into positive or negative phases. So in the negative phase, we tend to see warmer waters to northwest of Australia, and that get increased convection, so air rising up. So we get increased cloud and lots of moisture fitting across the country. And that's what we saw in 2016, a very strong negative Indian Ocean dipole pattern. And so it's quite wet. And this is an influence that kicks off typically May, June, July, and goes through till about November before it dies off. And so that's what we saw in 2016, strong negative IOD. And last year and the year before, so 2018, we had a sort of weakish borderline positive Indian Ocean dipole. So cooler water to the northwest of Australia, and the atmosphere sinking down and inhibiting rainfall. And last year it got quite strong. So we had a very strong positive Indian Ocean dipole pattern last year. It was the major climate influence in 2019. Look at the impacts on this slide. We can see the rainfall influences on the top and the temperature influences on the bottom. So note the strong influence of El Niños on the eastern states. But they do still influence rainfall across our part of the world through Adelaide and into the Barossa. And so in El Niño events like 2015, you get dry, hot conditions. La Niñas, you tend to get wet. So I think 2010-11, wet and cooler conditions. IOD, you get negative IOD. So there's the wetter conditions. So it's more of an influence over South Australia and Central States and Northern Territory. So wetter, cooler in negative IOD, and hotter and drier in positive IOD. So more of an influence over South Australia. So El Niño does have, and La Niña does have an influence on SA, but the positive of the IOD is in some ways a little bit more of a significant influence, and one of the possibly more important in some ways. So there's a tool which is a nice one for people to play around with called this is done by the guys who do the what's it called, the quick break or fast break. Yeah, the fast break. So Dale Gray and co, they've set up this local climate tool where you can go and examine the influence of various climate influences on various locations. So they've got Roseworthy in here. Unfortunately, they don't have Nuriupa, but you can see the variability through different climate influences. So the orange-brown ones, they tend to be your drier years. So that's more your positive IODs and El Niños, and then the blue ones, the La Niñas and the La Niña with negative IOD, they tend to be your wetter years. But anyway, a nice tool they're going to have play around with in your own time. you can see the, yeah, those positive IOD years and the low rainfall last year. And that's, if we look across the country, that's what we see. Yeah, very strong positive IOD, very hot, very dry. There's a little bit of climate change in there as well. But you can see the very strong positive IOD values last year. So the negative IOD 2016, sort of weakish, moderate positive IOD 2018. So I'll come to what we're expecting this year after I talk about the couple of other influences. So main Julian oscillations, this is pulses of tropical activity moving along the equator from near Africa, moves across northern Australia. So this is when we get increased moisture feeding across the country. So it's this is where your big rain events can come from, particularly through summer and into autumn. So it's often your break of the season can be associated with this MJ moving across northern Australia. Then it moves across into the Pacific Ocean, and when it's in the phase out in the Indian Ocean or the Pacific Ocean away from us, actually we end up with suppressed rainfall over northern Australia in that phase. So southern La Nina mode, this has been a bit interesting through the last few months. To measure what the cold fronts are doing as they whiz around Antarctica. And in negative SAM, the cold fronts are coming further north. That's generally good for rainfall, particularly through April to October. And positive phase, it's further south. The cold fronts are further south, so you tend to get decreased rainfall, typically in April to October. So there's a lot of different things that can cause this. So we can get influences from volcanoes and El Nino and IOD. There's correlations between these and what's happening with El Ninos and La Ninas and the Indian Ocean dipole. Anyway, I'll talk about what SAM's doing at the moment shortly. So if we look at December, for instance, this is the tail end of the positive IOD last year. So we had hot and dry conditions. The IOD hung around a bit, positive IOD event hung around a bit longer than usual last year, so it was still impacting things in December. And then as it wound up in early January, we went back to much more average conditions through January. And then February we had that big rain event in early February, and then not a lot after that. And then things got a little bit dry around the south coast, or the southern parts of South Australia through March. And so that's really the SAM had gone a bit positive. So the positive SAM's actually good for rainfall across inland and central Australia, but not great for rainfall over southern Australia. So what are we seeing at the moment? So SOI has been a bit negative. So that's saying we're seeing the SOI is just a little bit negative. So that's indicating that tropical influences are a little bit suppressed. Managing oscillation, we had a little bit of this is a really complex diagram, so you're just going to have to run with me here, but we just saw a little bit of a weak pulse come through in phase 4-5, just associated with that rain event a week or so ago. And now it's starting to move off into phases 6, 7, and 8. So that means that rainfall over the next couple of weeks is going to be suppressed. So this is the forecast over the next couple of weeks through the remainder of April. And that means we're going to generally see suppressed rainfall over the next couple of weeks. So, yeah, that's not great in terms of further big rainfall events. SAM's going a bit negative, which is good news. So this is forecasts from SAM, or there's another name for it called the Antarctic Oscillation, or AAO. So SAM's going a little bit negative. So basically, what I'm seeing over the next few weeks, there's not a lot of rainfall as we saw in the short term. The tropical activity means we're pretty unlikely to see any big events over the next sort of 2 to 3 weeks or so at least. But SAM is going a bit negative. So what that means is I think we'll start seeing more frequent cold fronts coming through, dropping a few millimetres, over a frequent small events as we move through the second half of April, particularly around in the last week of April. So I don't see a big rain event shaping up in terms of one big 20-30 millimetre rain event over 2 or 3 days happening in the next sort of 3 to 4 weeks or more. Now that's backed up. If we go into, I pulled some daily rainfall data for some outlook data for New Yorker, and what this is saying is this is the likelihood of, so once again, these are complex diagrams, but basically what they're telling me is we're unlikely to get like a 3-day rainfall event of any significance more than about sort of 5 to 10 millimetres until probably into mid-May. But we're more likely to see events adding up over a week or so, over a 7-day window, adding up to 15 millimetres, even 20 millimetres. We'll see something like that by the end of, by around the end of April. So that sort of supports this idea that the negative SAM is going to bring lots of frequent small rain events the next few weeks. Longer term, so what are we seeing with the major climate influences? This is on the Bureau's webpage, so you can actually look at a bunch of different models where they're going with the Pacific influences. So it's all fairly neutral at the moment as we go through April, May, and then we start seeing some indications of things heading towards, as we go through July, August, towards La Nina territory. Now, a couple of these US models here are a little bit bullish. They tend to be a little bit biased towards La Nina. So I wouldn't get too carried away with this, but it's promising indications that things are, the majority of models are heading towards La Nina territory through winter and into spring. So that's good news. So we're looking at something a little bit different to last year. We look at, there's a couple of different ways of looking at the models. So this is looking at the Nino 3.4 temperatures, so what's going on in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Warm than average is El Nino, and cool than average is La Nina, and the model forecasts, some of them are going a bit bullish into La Nina territory, but the majority is heading that direction, but it's more borderline La Nina territory. So it's good news, but just we're not looking at something like 2010-11 where it got strong La Nina and it got quite wet. Indian Ocean, so if we look at the Bureau and other models of the Indian Ocean, it's, as we go through July, August, it starts heading a little bit towards negative IOD territory as well. So that's good news as well. So still, we've got 2 models that are probably a bit bullish going into there, but at least it's heading in the right direction. So neutral to borderline negative IOD, neutral to sort of borderline La Nina. So it's going in the right direction is the good thing. And we're seeing something quite different to last year where it was quite strongly in positive IOD territory. So what are we seeing if we look at the model outlooks over the next few months? So we've got a couple of different systems here. This is a US multi-model ensemble on the left for temperatures, the European one on the right. And they're all saying same sort of thing, expecting quite warm conditions over Northern Australia, so into the pastoral regions, but average to cooler than average temperatures across Southern Australia through the next few months. So that continues as we go through winter and even into early spring. Just very average temperatures, if anything, slightly cooler overall. Phosphorus I expect to be probably sort of average to a little bit less than average. So with more negative SAM and cloudy conditions, the sort of average rainfall that we're seeing to a slightly wetter rainfall, frost risk I think is going to be average to lower, perhaps a little bit lower than average. So there's in terms of frosts. Sorry. And then on to rainfall. The rainfall maps for May on the left. We've got a little bit of event coming through, which I think we'll see something possibly feeding through around about mid-May, feeding through from the northwest in that. So that green there. May, June, June's tending a little bit on the wetter side. Then July, that's more of a typical La Nina type rainfall pattern, so impacting the eastern states, kicking in through July. August goes a little bit more average, but still probably a little bit wetter on the east, slightly wetter on the eastern states. So it's all looking fairly average to slightly wetter than average in terms of rainfall conditions. And then the European models, I've got fairly average, and once again getting a little bit wetter on the eastern states as we go through late winter into spring. So you've seen that sort of wetter influence a little bit more. It's typical La Nina, a little bit wetter in the eastern states, but we'll see a little bit of that our way. Now, if we drill into Nuriupa, so this, I've pulled some model data, done a rainfall accumulation. And this is from a bunch of different models, and their outlook rainfall accumulated over the next sort of 5 or 6 months for Nuriupa. And so I've got the average rainfall accumulation there in the solid line. So that's the black solid line there is what the average historical rainfall accumulation through April to end of September. And then I've got the model accumulation on there. So it's got things a little bit, perhaps a little bit dry through April into the start of May. Then around about mid-May, it starts to increase a little bit. So we've got a rainfall event, a weakish rainfall event end of April, something else mid-May, and then it looks like it accumulates pretty steadily from then on through June, July, August, at slightly above average levels. And so by the time we get to the end of September, we're maybe 50, 60 millimetres above average. So that's what we're seeing in there. So yeah, Brett, you that's the end of the season outlook stuff. And I've got some slides on climate change if you want me to leap into those.
Yeah, I think that'd be good. Yeah, you go for it. Maybe just a quick question while you've got that slide up there, Darren.
Sure. Yep.
So just the average versus what you expect. So what you're saying towards the end of spring, we're looking at probably a decile 7 season for Nuriupa. Is that roughly what it equates to?
I'm not familiar with the. I haven't dug into the decile amounts for Nuri. So yeah,
it's slightly above average anyway.
Yeah. So it's a little bit above average. I mean, there's a fair bit of spread in there. So this is if you look at the spread on those different model runs, we've got this one out here which is going for a really big rain event in late April. Pretty unlikely, but in fact extremely unlikely. This shows so there's a range of possible outcomes in there, but the accumulation is just ticking over. And this is the kind of thing I'd expect for conditions that are with types of climate influences that we're seeing in there. It's probably a little bit hard to see, but some signs there of a reasonable rain event in early September. Now this is you've got to be really careful because this is you're running the modelling this far ahead. You want to be careful about drilling into detail too much with it, but the overall indication that the rainfall is just going to be heading in that sort of a little bit above average territory is really consistent with what you expect under climate influences that are La Nina-ish and a bit negative ID as well. So so that's really the key thing we're seeing at this stage. We at the time of year when the forecasts for the climate influences start firming up a little bit, so we can have a little bit more confidence in where they're going, and they're certainly looking at something quite a bit different to last year, where we had that really strong positive ID. So it's sort of quietly confident that we'll have at least an average rainfall year, maybe even a little bit wetter than average coming in.
No worries. Perhaps Darren, if you could just move on to the climate change part of your talk, that'd be good.
Yeah, so I'll whip through this pretty quickly. I mean, if you do feel like you want to have a more comprehensive session that's just devoted on climate change, I'm really happy to talk to that, and I can pull some more detailed data on that. but just really quickly with climate change, I mean, it's been really relevant with the fires that we've seen. So, you know, it's almost feels biblical in terms of, you know, pestilence and fire and, you know, it's probably good news we're not seeing indications of a strong La Nina, because then we'd get into floods. So anyway, yeah, climate change, we've put really big pulse of carbon dioxide and methane and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere over a relatively short period of time geologically over the last 200 years, and most particularly in the last 50 years or so. I mean, if people doubt the influence that billions of humans have on the climate, it's been really interesting the impact that shutting down activity quite significantly has had over the last couple of weeks. You can see that we're having clearer skies because not so many vehicles driving around, that sort of thing. So the fact, you know, it has become quite evident that just in the last couple of weeks, just how much influence we all collectively have on the climate and the atmosphere. Methane's a bit of a significant contributor. So those who are running livestock, the methane's being burped out is going into the atmosphere, and that has a pretty reasonably significant influence, as well as the carbon dioxide from burning oil and gas and coal and stuff. Basically, just cut to the chase with this, what the climate scientists and research scientists are saying is that those increasing greenhouse gas levels should actually stop more and more heat from escaping to space. So there's a certain amount of heat that escapes to space. We get energy coming in from the sun, and the oceans and the land won't absorb that, and then that gets re-emitted back out to space. A certain level of greenhouse gases is great. That keeps things at a reasonable temperature. But if you increase greenhouse gas levels significantly, that stops more and more heat from going to space. And one of the things that a lot of people don't appreciate is that if you look at satellite measurements of infrared energy or heat energy going to space over the last 40 years, there's less and less being measured from the satellite data going to space. So it directly confirms all the modelling and all the theory that sits underneath the climate science. So we are directly observing the changes going on that we're expecting from those increasing greenhouse gas levels. There was also measurements at the surface. So pyranometer measurements at the surface are showing the particular instruments that measure infrared heat. They're showing increasing amounts of infrared energy in the wavelengths at which carbon dioxide and methane trap heat. So we're seeing two different sets of measurements telling us that yes, what those increasing greenhouse gases levels are changing the energy balance in the atmosphere and stopping less heat going to space. So that has a whole lot of different impacts. One of the interesting things is if you look at the modelling over the last 20, 30 years, so we've got modelling from the 1990s and then mid-90s and the 2000s, and this is all the different modelling here, and the global temperature record is really consistent with what the modelling has been suggesting for decades. So the modelling is doing a pretty good job in terms of capturing what's going on, certainly at the global and the continental scale. So Australia's warmed up. We're getting more frequent heat extreme events. This one on the right, it's relevant to the summer. We've just, the start of summer that we just had, we're in that fire weather conditions are worsening. We're seeing extreme fire weather conditions starting about 4 to 6 weeks earlier than they used to 30, 40 years ago. So more into late spring rather than sort of early midsummer. I'm getting more extreme fire weather days, and that's related to that combination of drier conditions and increasing temperatures. The influence on rainfall, basically as the planet warms up, the tropics expand towards the poles, and so we get more rainfall in summer coming down from the north, and we get drier conditions with the cold front staying further south in April to October. So that's a bit more evident if you look across into sort of South Australia and across into Victoria. You can see that more strongly in the rainfall record. But generally we're seeing rainfall decreases in April to October rainfall across the agricultural regions of South Australia. coming from those cold fronts staying further south. El Niños and La Niña events are expected to become more extreme. So when we get El Niños, they'll be hotter and drier. And when we get La Niñas, they'll be wetter and with more extreme flooding. That's one of the impacts from climate change. And so this is a very quick run through. So just to give you a very quick taster of what we're seeing. On me, this graphs here are basically saying that indicating the lags in the climate system that come. So we've got emissions on the top and various emission scenarios, but there's basically some really significant lags. So a big one is around about 30-year lag. So if we want to minimise the amount of further climate change, we need to get acting really, really quickly and really get to zero emissions by 2050 at least, if not more than that, and start sucking carbon dioxide down again to minimise the amount of further change and keep it to about another degree or so on top of the warming that we've already had. Otherwise, we start getting to warming over Australia and globally of 3 to 4 degrees if we don't reduce emissions. So there's lags in terms of responses. There's emissions, and that's the atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, then the resulting surface air temperature change. And so we can minimise things, or we can get really nasty. This is ocean warming and the amount of sea level rise, and that goes on for centuries after the increase in carbon dioxide levels. So there's really long-term impacts on the climate system that go for hundreds, even thousands of years. So what we do in the next 30 years is really, really, really important. And we can minimise the impacts, minimise the change to something we can manage. If we don't reduce emissions, it could get pretty nasty, particularly from about 2050 onwards. So this is why I think some of the school kids are getting a bit upset, because we're making decisions about what the condition, about what the state of Australia might be from 2050 onwards, when they're having to live through that, and we've gone already. Anyway, just to summarise, I'm going to summarise that. So we had dry and hot conditions last year from very strong positive Indian Ocean dipole. The climate influence this year looking quite different. So we're tending to borderline La Nina conditions and slightly tending towards negative ID. So it's heading in the right direction. Some of the models are a bit bullish. I don't think we're going to quite go that strongly, but it's heading in the right direction. Autumn, the remainder of autumn looks a little bit dry, a little bit on the dry side through April. As I mentioned, watch out for some rain, I think, in the last week of autumn. Looks like something to watch out for mid-May. And so not seeing anything in terms of big rainfall events, but we probably will get 15, 20, 25 millimetres accumulating over a week or so through, I think, sort of late April into and mid-May. And then it starts ticking off from mid-May onwards. The rainfall looks like it'll tend a little bit above average from mid-May through winter into spring. And that's consistent with what you expect with that sort of push towards La Nina conditions. And then climate change starting to impact, and really good idea to really look at ways to reduce emissions. So, you know, looking at how you can change your feeds. At CSIRO, we're working on ways to change feed to reduce methane emissions from livestock. Looking at solar panels and wind farms, that sort of thing. It's really getting cost effective now, and ways to reduce the transport costs as well. So that's about it from me, Brett.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Darren. Thanks for that wide-ranging presentation. Good to find out a little bit about the climate influences and your predictions for rainfall this coming year, and also those hard facts, I guess, on climate change. But I guess good to hear that there's a little bit of rain on the horizon, touch wood. So we'll now address any questions. So if you'd like to send them in, please do. If you could just go ahead and type them in your Q&A. Just before you, I've just got a couple that have come in. Darren, are you still there?
Yep, sure. Yep.
Yeah, no worries. Just in terms of the confidence do you have in predicting the spring rainfall events? Is that a reasonable confidence this far out?
So I think the best way to look at this is, so what are the major climate influences that we're seeing, and what do you typically see from those? And it's, you know, I think probably the best we can say is that we are heading, you know, we're getting to the time of year we can have started having a little bit of confidence about where things are going in terms of the Indian Ocean dipole and the El Niño La Niña patterns, and so that's and it's heading in the right direction in terms of getting reasonable rainfall. So we're looking at something quite different to last year. So that's really the best way to look at it. And if we look at the models are consistent with that as well. So that's really probably about the best thing. That is really the best way to look at it in terms of trying to look at rainfall this far ahead. If you look at the models and look at the skill or accuracy of them, the models in terms of detailed rainfall forecast through week by week, month by month, the accuracy does drop off pretty considerably from about over the, you know, when you get to sort of month 3 ahead, 4 ahead, that sort of thing. So the best way to look at this is actually, okay, what are the major climate influences, and what's the typical rainfall that I would get under these climate influences that we're expecting? So that's so that the fact that we're seeing sort of borderline La Niña climate influences, sort of pushing maybe a little bit towards negative Indian Ocean dipole. That's yeah, that's, so what's the typical rainfall that we get out of that? We can go and look at that local climate tool and get a sense of what's going on out of that, and yeah, and that's consistent with this idea of average, maybe slightly wetter than average conditions.
Yep, no worries.
Yep.
Just related to the models, Darren, is there one of the questions that have come in is sort of, you mentioned about their strengths and weaknesses, but are they generally, in your experience, have you found more like different models more reliable than others that you tend to look to, or that varies throughout the year?
Yeah, good question. I mean, if I stuck on a desert island with one model, it'd be the ECMWF, because the European model, major European model, they throw a lot of money at that. But it's more useful to actually look at what the range of models are doing, and so so just be a little bit wary that, you know, as we saw on the way through, some of the US models are quite bullish towards La Niña, but they tend to be biased a bit that way. So, but if you look at the models overall, they're all heading a little bit in that direction. So, so there, that's so this is where it's useful. You know, you get a lot more. You have a bit more confidence if you look at a model ensemble or range of models and what that means, what they're showing and what their tendencies are doing. And yeah, so you might start hearing people saying, "Oh, it's going to go La Niña, it's going to go La Niña." I'd just be a little bit cautious on that, because, you know, they might just be looking at one or two models that are a bit bullish and a bit biased in that direction. So that's where you got to be a little bit careful.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks very much. Just got a regional Pacific question that's come in. Do you know if there's a link to a weather station at Mount Rufus, Darren, which is just north of Nurulta?
I don't. Let me just duck out and we can try something quickly on here. So hopefully people can see this. So just going to the Bureau's page and going into climate and weather and climate data. And let's go Mount Rufus. Spell it right. Hopefully I've got that spelled right. No towns matching don't know what the spelling is on that?
Yeah, no, that should be correct. RUFUS.
Okay.
That's come in.
So select using the map. Anyway, I'll just show you this. People can go and play with this in their own time, perhaps. But yeah, this is one way to find available station data. So what do we got? Where are we? Punda.
Yep. So if you just go a bit further east, so just a bit further, yep. So just go up, Mount Rufus, Dutton. So
Oh, there we go.
Yep,
there is. There we go. I'm not sure why that didn't come up there before. So there's daily rainfall there. There's not an automatic weather station, but there's someone there taking daily rainfall readings. So yeah, and you can download that. You look at various years. It's only a few years there. Anyway, sorry, that's answered the question.
Yep. No, excellent. No worries. I've just had a comment that's come in from Joe Keynes. Joe is the Livestock SA chair, and he's saying that Livestock SA is developing policy aiming towards carbon neutrality by 2030, which also lines up with MLA targets. Thanks Joe for that. I've just also had a question actually just about your business. Darren, can you just tell us what your business has to offer, please? Because there might be some other people online that would be interested in that.
Okay, so I finished up with the Bureau in mid-December. So basically taking a bit of a break and over summer and then having to think about what I'm going to do. So basically what I'm aiming at doing is pulling data for specific locations from international outlook modelling data sets, and so people subscribe to me to pull the data from for their location or locations, and then run whatever particular analysis they're interested in. So if they want to know numbers of rain events over 25 millimetres through the season ahead, or frost events, or evapotranspiration over the next 9 months. So basically, what I'm setting up is something that pulls the rainfall and temperature evapotranspiration from the outlook modelling, and then people can select what particular parameters and things they're interested in, and they'll send that back to them each month.
Excellent, thanks.
And also keeping also doing some consulting around climate change as well, which I've got a fair bit of experience with as well.
Yep, no worries. Excellent, thanks. Actually, by the way, when we can go ahead and certainly put your contact details in when we go ahead and send out the webinar recording and the PDF to everyone online too. So that'll also give them a chance to contact you directly about further information. One last question, unless anyone's got any further one. Just one about any models for when the season will finish, or is it too early to predict, Darren?
When the season will finish?
Yeah, it's $1 million question.
Yeah. So we're talking about spring.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So once again, really, probably the best guide is what happens typically in La Nina conditions. In La Nina climate influences or the negative IODs, you tend to get wetter conditions in spring. So that's really about the best we could say with sort of any degree of confidence this far ahead. Is that under La Nina conditions, you tend to get increased rainfall in spring, so you tend to get later finishes in spring and early summer. That graph and the modelling that we showed has got a fair bit of consistency with that, and it's actually showing, where was that one? Rainfall accumulation. It's actually, it's actually got some sort of moderate. It's a bit hard to see in there, but it's actually suggesting there's a little bit of a signal there for some significant rainfall event in the start of September. Now it's going to be, this is really pushing the modelling to its limits, so it's going to be really interesting to see whether that anything like that actually happens. Yeah, so you want to take this with a grain of salt at this stage, but what we're seeing is consistent with, and there's some more further rainfall events through September, and under that sort of influences where it's pushing a little bit towards La Nina, you'd expect that sort of, later finish to the season.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks very much, Darren. That's all the questions that have come in, so we might leave it for now. Thanks everyone for your participation tonight, and thanks Darren for, of course, presenting to this webinar. So well done. Thank you very much. Also, just finally, specific acknowledgement to the Adelaide Mount Lofty Ranges NRM board for funding BIG's soil moisture monitoring project, and therefore this webinar. As I mentioned before, there'll be a recording of the webinar that's going to be sent out to everyone registered on it, even though you mightn't be online tonight. That'll also go onto the BIG's website, www.biggroup.org.au. And also, actually, if you'd like to find any more about BIG, of course, and also to receive a monthly newsletter or even join as a member, please check out our website or visit our Facebook page. Just a quick plug for upcoming events. Of course, they've been a bit put on hold now because of COVID-19, but just a plug for an upcoming short video that we're putting together. And actually, it's a bit of an extension on what Darren touched on tonight related to climate variability. Peter Toomey manages BIG's weather station data, and some of you will know him, and he's dissected some of that data and it's come up with some quite interesting observations about local climate variability. So watch out for that one. That's going to be a short 10-minute one that's going to be out later in the month. So that's about it. Thanks for your dialing in tonight. After you leave, there's actually going to be a short survey will pop up on our screen. So very grateful if you could please fill that out. Thanks in the meantime. Have a good evening and have a safe and happy Easter all. Good night.